Warning, this review will contain spoilers, and if you haven't seen the episode in the last 4 days and decide to go past this point, it's your own fault, so don't get mad at me. Last week's episode review was cancelled due to a job interview for me, while AK Yearling announced her retirement. The world is an ever-changing place, but will that latter setback deliver an intriguing episode? I dare to question its possibility, because that's all I can do. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pones N Stuff. Daring Do episodes in the past have been very hit or miss. Stranger Than Fanfiction was a trope-mocking, subversive, and incredibly entertaining outing of an episode, while Daring Don't and Read It and Weep, the episodes that brought the character to prominence, didn't strike a chord with me, despite having the potential to do so. So what does this newest adventure have to put together for me to honestly believe that it can match up to its lofty Season 6 predecessor? For starters, leave the action-adventure cliches at the door. We've seen enough of those, and after they were deconstructed last time out, I want to see something new and fresh for the character. Second of all, a new location wouldn't hurt, because seriously, jungles get quite boring after a while. And finally, I want to see a message that can be taken at face value and leave an impact. And you know what? That checklist is rather nice, clean, and simple. Some of those things manage to get done right, while others, not so well. Let's kick things off with the positives. Firstly, we have Somnambula, a new location, which is great for keeping things fresh in the long term. Secondly, we have a good message that helps build Daring Do as a character by having her acknowledge the consequences of her actions, helping rebuild her confidence in a way that is empathetic and understandable. While thirdly, a lot of the action cliches of the past episodes up until basically the last 2 or 3 minutes were left behind in favour of a more grounded and emotive approach that explored her character's wider effects without having to write her off completely. Now, while that's a good thing, there are a few things I need to take issue with here, because the whole concept behind the AK Yearling Daring Do character is that no one knows that the former is the latter. So to have this episode flip that concept on his head is not only bemusing, but fascinating in equal measure, all while punching a hole clear through the established lore. Because how can Daring Do exist in reality in one part of Equestria when she's fiction in another? That doesn't make sense to me. Now, sure, you could say the I don't sell my books there is a legitimate one, but even then I have to point the finger at retroactive continuity just to make sure that this story actually can try to work. And the more I watch the conflict between the residents of Somnambula and Rainbow Dash's attempts to right the apparent wrongs, much like that concept, it doesn't feel entirely natural. More hammy than outraged, as a fact, not giving off the sense of realism to their anger, which is laughable when they quickly flip their opinions around once the truth comes out. And while I understand that this is a showcase of the effect that propaganda can have on a community and a society, Starlight Glimmer pulled it off much more convincingly in Season 5, so it won't win any awards for originality there either. This fleeting and faltering execution overall was hurt even more because the main villain in Caballeron, I did say spoilers at the beginning, is so easily noticeable even through the blatant attempts to disguise him that you're just watching and waiting for the inevitable reveal, or while it just juggles fast and slow momentums without having to stay still long enough to try and grasp at the little straws that it has to hang on to what flimsy narrative this actually is. And the pace isn't the only victim of this indecisive nature, as the story itself feels very light on substance, so they felt the need to stretch out the importance of this new location with an extremely visually pleasing yet unwarranted exposition dump that took 4 minutes out of the middle act. And not just that, they wasted nearly half the episode in the opening act setting up the conflict extremely slowly, which meant by the time the ending came they had to rush it all, and it inevitably felt like a complete lost cause because I didn't feel satisfied at all for what happened. Especially in an episode that tried to get rid of the action tropes, they shoehorned an action set piece, and it ended with a Deus Ex Machina that made absolutely no sense. Yeah, I know, the symbolic leap of faith being buoyed up by hope in those steam vents. I get it. They could have easily walked round to the side, jumped onto the platform, and saved Rainbow Dash that way. If I'm actually finding better ways to resolve your plots dramatically, then you are not doing your job. So overall, the story looks unsalvageable, but it is saved by the expansion of the lore with the new location, resolving its conflict well in the development of Daring Do, and of course having continuity to prior episodes noted. And of course this is especially in the Parasprite outbreak in Philadelphia being cleared, something that was first acknowledged in Season 1 at the end of Swarm of the Century. Fantastic! On top of that, I love the fact that A.K. Yearling's villains in the books were technically fictional, meaning Caballeron's importance is much more apparent than you realise. World building at its damn finest. Following on from that, the writing elaborated on the raw and emotive side of Yearling and her character in the face of criticism, combining her well with the inherently irritating but very much needed Rainbow Dash with her role as her staunch, biased defender, while Pinkie Pie was actually level-headed and understated, proving to be a competent thinker, which is something you do not see often, and I love it, while Caballeron was his vindictive and manipulative best, proving smarter than most of the show's villains in terms of actual layered plans, until he stumbled into typical antagonist tropes to make him sound thicker than a soup. And the already noted citizens of Sonambula, while nice to see in their context, didn't offer too much outside of their corrupted blind rage. Then again, when you actually think about it, all of these facets resemble journalistic criticism, and in some cases the production of such journalism. So I guess the depth for that is an absolute plus from me. And the voice acting isn't bad either, with the varied and consistent performances across the board. But the fact is, at times, it's a little overblown for the tone that this episode wanted, as a dramatic episode with comedic undertones on occasion does not need all this shouting, affirming back to me that while its stable and consistent writing was great, the story keeps yelling its desired intentions. It doesn't want to be quiet, it wants to be more than that. And it wore this reviewer's patience very thin indeed. Daring Do episodes of the past have often had the writing take a backseat to the story, creating these elaborate adventures without very much substance on the forefront for the titular character. This time, however, they've flipped around and it's all quite good, as Daring Do has grown quite considerably, which I am very happy about. And the message has definitely helped with that, as it delivers its moral about not losing hope in the face of blatant criticism extremely well, and it's very profound and effective. Except for the childish delivery at the end of the episode. I wasn't a big fan of that, but at least the message still did a good job in keeping this episode together, because the whole plot revolved around it and it made a lot of sense. But the fact is, the story was quite tumultuous and very inconsistent despite some minimal strengths it had, and the writing did a decent, solid effort. However, it was up to the visuals and the audio to get this episode back onto good tracks. And with a new location at hand, they had a lot to take advantage of. An Egyptian-themed location allowed for new characters and building designs, which when combined with the appropriate music, added a lot of atmosphere and charm to an area we'd not seen before, making it feel mysterious yet familiar, granting it a lot of scope despite it being in the background for most scenes. And unlike Las Pegasus, we got to explore the surrounding desert landscape, and make it feel more alive than the gambling theme park ever was, something that I will compliment the animators for doing. Now, the facial expressions were just about as ludicrous in places as they would allow, and the Sonambula origin story, transitioning from hieroglyphics to reality and then back again, brought this episode to life. So even though I felt it was unnecessary on a narrative and story front, animation-wise, this was the crowning achievement of the whole episode, offering up even more elaborate designs for the Sphinx and the ancient characters, adding even more to proceedings than was already on the table. And while this was all spaced out across the episode, it created a nice summary of its visual offerings that made me smile, even more so with a good use of light and colour on occasion that showed how far the animation of Flash had come in terms of detail. As for the music, it followed similarly with the Egyptian theme instrumental pieces, coupling with the tense and dramatic action pieces to substitute where the story was lacking and grab your attention. Again, by spreading itself around to not get too tiring on the ears, but doing its job regardless. By utilising it, less is more strategy, their effectiveness came through rather well, making this episode feel more full than its beleaguered story would allow it to be, to ensure that my final rating is more measured than you'd actually think. And with that in mind, I feel that this episode does a lot more than the summary of its premise highlights it to do. It tried something different with a slower paced Daring Do adventure, which succeeded in elaborating on her character and creating an atmosphere of change in how she's written. But I feel that the writers couldn't get out of how they already knew how to write her, meaning that they wanted to revert to form but just couldn't. And while the episode felt fresh at times, it was lumbered awkwardly with that transition, souring its effectiveness and creating much unneeded tension, which in turn was mostly the story's doing. That story was an unwilling participant, as it struggled with its new identity, and it fought to get its way in the end like a spoilt child, ruining itself quite badly. Now, while this is the case, the rest of the episode's categories tried their damnedest to soldier on and utilize their time effectively to ensure this episode could be saved well. The character writing, animation, music, and message all stood up and delivered solid efforts, making this episode appear better than it honestly should have. And while I am all too aware of the problems it had at hand, it lacked subtlety and care, that is very much apparent. But it doesn't stop this episode from being a good watching experience that intrigued as much as it irritated, doing enough right to where I can respect its courage for stepping into new territory for the character and type of episode that it was. It was one that was perfectly fine but needed more substance to showcase a score that truly reflects the risk it took. But considering it hit average, despite a massive stumbling block, it's a great effort for an episode that I didn't think would achieve that much. Overall, Daring Done scored a total of 13 out of 25, which is slap bang in the middle, it's a C. So in closing, this episode is a decidedly average one, which I didn't expect going in because I didn't think the synopsis would give me much hope. And based on the look of the story, I was bang on right to believe that. But I'm amazed the rest of the episode pulled itself together and saved it from the depths of despair. Because seriously, an average rating is the least of what I thought this episode could have reached. It wasn't a good episode, but it wasn't a bad one either, and I would rather take this kind of rating over something lower, because it could have gone a lot worse for Daring Do here. Then again, she always gets out in the end. Logically, you needed to have a rescue, and this rating bang on did it. It's not the best Daring Do episode I've ever seen, it's not the worst, I can be pleased with that. So next time we have another hair-raising adventure to analyse, pick apart and summarise, and I'm very happy with that. Let's just hope that all of these outside influences don't keep making me push it back to a Thursday upload when it should be on a Wednesday. Hopefully that will change and it should all go back to normal, but I'm holding my breath that we don't get a sudden plot twist in how the schedule plays out. I have been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this has been another episode of Pones N Stuff for the CC Network, and I will see you all next time.